Pretty much as soon as Europeans made their way to the Americas, they started hearing reports of weird, hairy characters living in the forest and kind of just hanging around while they were trying to find their way through these same forests. In this book by Jose Mariano Mostinho, dated from 1795, he found that there are people in the Nootka Sound, so Pacific Northwest, talking about the Matlaks, inhabitant of the mountains district, of whom they all have an unbelievable terror. They imagine his body as very monstrous, all covered with stiff black bristles, a head similar to a human one, but with much greater, sharper, and stronger fangs than those of the bear. Extremely long arms and toes, and fingers armed with long curved claws. His shouts alone, they say, force those who hear them to the ground, and any unfortunate body he slaps is broken into 1,000 pieces. So this explorer who made several trips to the United States and Mexico before they were the United States and Mexico finds his way into a variety of new places and meeting new people as part of his job for trading and kind of as a naturalist, a person who's just interested in what's out in nature and a person who eventually finds their way to this Nootka Sound in the Pacific Northwest and hears about this character. In 1811, David Thompson, a surveyor and other trader working for the Hudson's Bay Company, goes to British Columbia, Washington, Montana, Idaho. A few years after Lewis and Clark, in 1811, writes in his journal, continuing our journey in the afternoon, we came on the track of a large animal, the snow about 6 inches deep on the ice. I measured it, 4 large toes, each of 4 inches in length, to each a short claw. The ball of the foot sunk 3 inches lower than the toes. The hinder part of the foot did not mark well, the length 14 inches by 8 inches in breadth. Walking from north to south and having passed about 6 hours, we were in no humor to follow him. The men and Indians would have to be would have it to be a young mammoth and held it to be the track of a large old grizzled bear. Yet the shortness of the nails, the ball of the foot, and its great size was not that of the bear, otherwise that of a very large old bear, his claws worn away. This the Indian would not allow. So weird tracks from a young mammoth or a bear or something of the sort, but the elements don't add up, and the locals lore, the local story thinks that the story of the bear is pretty unlikely. Again, still the same area, still about the same Pacific Northwest, and another grizzled old character, mysterious, walking through the forest. 1847, Paul Kane, a artist, as you can tell from the title of the book here, Wanderings of an Artist, is visiting with indigenous people. So we are now a little bit further into history, but the area remain of the people around Fort Vancouver and the Lewis River, as it is known today. And the person takes a break to paint a volcano or to see a volcano. We arrived at the mouth of the Cattle River, 26 miles from Fort Vancouver. I stopped to make a sketch of Mount St. Helens, distant, I suppose, about 30 or 40 miles. This mountain has never been visited by either whites or Indians. The latter assert that it is inhabited by a race of beings from a different species who are cannibals, and whom they hold in great dread. They also say that there's a lake at its base with a very extraordinary kind of fish in it, with a head more resembling that of a bear than any other animal. The superstitions are taken from the statement of a man who, they say, went to the mountain with another and escaped the fate of his companion, who was eaten by these skookums or evil genii. I offered a considerable bribe to any other Indian who would accompany me in this exploration, but could not find one hard enough to venture. Skookum is a term that becomes used a little bit throughout the United States. It comes from a jargon that is used for trading across tribes, across tribal languages as well. The Chinook jargon has this word skookums that represents a weird gray character that lives in the forest that seems to want some kind of problem with the local population. By the 1930s, there are stories pretty much everywhere of these skookums. Here in 1938, a story told by a pioneers. So again, this is one of those folklore pieces of what the pioneers saw when they moved to the frontier. The white people came to this country. A big skookum or hairy man came and drove all the Indians away that were living on the PL Prairie, and the Indians never went back there until the Roundtree boy took up claims there and went to live there. The story is told by some person named P.H. Roundtree. So the Roundtree boys, being their ancestors, apparently were enough to scare away the presence of the skookums. And of course, this story is a rather common one in many other places where you have these first encounters with others, others of any kind, of course. Here, this story from Wendell, a army major, I believe, looking in the Himalayas, some large footprints in the snow led across our track and away up to the higher peaks. These were alleged to be the trail of the hairy wild men who are believed to live amongst the eternal snows, along with the mythical white lions whose roar is reputed to be heard during storms. The belief in these creatures is universal among Tibetans. None, however, of the many Tibetans I have interrogated on this subject could ever give me an authentic case. So once again, another story now in Asia, pretty clear across the ocean, clear across another continent, where a weird hairy person is living there. Now, here there's a pretty clear idea that the people themselves who are telling those stories have never seen it, and whether this is a matter of folklore, religion, or if this is another kind of person is a little bit hazier than the previous accounts that we have seen, though the person gives us their opinion of the tracks that they saw. On the most superficial investigation, it always resolved itself into something that somebody heard tell of. These so-called hairy wild men are evidently the great yellow snow bear, which is highly carnivorous and often kills yak. Yet, although most of the Tibetans know this, bear sufficiently to give it a wide berth, they live in such an atmosphere of superstition that they are always ready to find extraordinary and supernatural explanations of uncommon events. According to this person here, the local population, even though they believe there is a existing mystical creature, also know that there is no such thing. This is just part of their superstitious belief, of course. As we mentioned last week, this is something that is disregarded by somebody who is there for very practical mind, practical reasons, and therefore stories of a mythical white creature walking through the snow is something that they would not tolerate very easily. In South America, in Panama, another similar story. Here's a tale for the big game hunter who is tired of slaughtering inoffensive and accessible beasts in well-known Africa. In 1921, while I was in Panama, an old and experienced American prospector, Shay by name, came to me with a strange story. He had just returned from a trip to Southeast Darien. With another American, he had ascended the Sambu River, which enters the sea on the southern shore of San Miguel Bay. The country here was, and still is, wholly unknown. Darien is a province in Panama, capital city of La Palma. It is a high altitude. It is, as you can see, in the forest near a valley, near a river. So a pretty wild place, and of course a place of very large interest for people who were traveling through the South American continent, moving from one part to the other. Now, here's the story from Shay. All that night, he heard the footsteps of a large animal in the jungle above his camp, and when dawn came, he heard a curious chattering sound. He looked up and saw standing on the top of the bank an animal which appeared to his unscientific mind to be a cross between a Negro and a gigantic ape. It was 6 feet tall, walked erect, weighed possibly 300 pounds, and was covered with long black hair. It was glaring down at him and chattering its teeth in rage. Shay whipped out his revolver and shot it through the head. It tumbled down the bank and lay still beside his canoe. When Shay recovered from his fright, he measured the animal crudely. It was heavily built like a gorilla, but the big toes on the feet were parallel with the other toes, as in a human being, not opposed from thumbs, not opposed like thumbs, but as in all other monkeys and great apes. Unfortunately, Shay was too exhausted to bring any part of the animal back to civilization. He barely managed to get down to Penis Bay on the Pacific and attract the attention of the villagers to let them know that, there's a scary person in these woods. So another story of another weird guy, a little bit more precisely described here. This person has met a person that saw the large monkey, large ape gorilla thing. Of course, still using the racist vocabulary of the time, although this is probably early 20th century, if I remember correctly. The story is pretty similar to the ones that we have seen before, and it continues, of course, as there is this larger awareness of the people that are living in other places. And of course, those other places correspond with their own other places. Their own neighbors have their own neighboring stories. Back to the snowman, it is a remarkable fact that the statements of Tibetans, Sherpas, and Lepchas concerning the snowman's appearance largely coincide. According to their description, a warrant for the arrest of this most wanted of all inhabitants of the Himalayas would read as follows: 7 to 7 feet 6 inches tall, when erect on his hind legs, powerful body covered with dark brown hair, long arms, oval head running to a point at the top, and ape-like face. Face and head are only sparsely covered with hair. He fears the light of a fire, and in spite of his great strength, is regarded by the less superstitious inhabitants of the Himalayas as a harmless creature that would attack a man only if wounded. Kind of typical um, behavior for an ape and for most wild characters, of course. Now, the story in particular here goes on to criticize the aspect of this snowman being actually a snowman, because the people who live in the area does not see that person as living in the snow. It lives in the forest that is right across the Himalayan forest, of course. So the idea that this person is living in the snow itself would have made it more animal-like, but by living in the forest classifies it much closer to being a human-like, or perhaps ape-like, at least an ape in the way in which people remember apes to look like or think of apes living like. So there are plenty of accounts across the world from people seeing a wild characters that walks up straight, that is 6 to 8 feet tall, and that lives around. And we have these reports from early explorers pretty much everywhere we look. That being said, we mostly have secondhand versions. We have people who hear about it, not much of a first-hand version. And of course, because all of this is happening before we have portable recording equipment, a lot of it is coming in terms of a story that is written down, no pictures, no evidence, no bodies. Now, that's not to say that there is no actual evidence, and we're going to talk about it, about what that evidence could be a little bit later this week. But the fact that these weird characters have been seen by somebody, or told somebody, puts us within the realm of lore, kind of much closer to us than any kind of mythology.